The old man stands near the door of the casino, and he holds his hand out to the people coming in. It is late in his life now, and this is Las Vegas. And the floor of Caesar's palace is loud, the way those rooms are always loud. The bright clatter of the machines, the smoke, the strangers moving past with somewhere better to be. He wears a good suit. He smiles. He offers his hand, and some of them shake it, and some of them look right through him, the way you look through a man you do not know. They do not know him. But there was a time, my friend, when that hand was the most famous hand in all of America. There was a time when a whole country gathered close to the radio in the dark, holding its breath, waiting to hear what that hand would do. He was the first black man that white America took into its heart and called a hero. And once, on a single summer night, in something close to 2 minutes, that hand struck a blow against the idea that one kind of man is born better than another. A blow that was felt clear around the world. Now he shakes the hands of tourists who will never learn his name. How does that happen? How does a man hold a whole nation up with his 2 fists and end his days here, offering his hand to strangers? That is the story I want to tell you tonight. To tell it, we have to go back. Back before the fists, before the radio, before any of it, to a small cabin in Alabama, and a boy who had nothing at all. The cabin sat at the edge of a cotton field in Chambers County, Alabama, not far from a town called Lafayette. It was a small, plain dwelling, and on the 13th of May, 1914, inside it, a woman named Lily Barrow gave birth to her 7th child. They named him Joseph. He was the 7th of 8, the grandson of people who had been enslaved, and somewhere far back in that bloodline, the descendant of the white man who had once owned them. That was the country he was born into. That was the weight he was born carrying. There was no money. There was almost never any money. The children slept 3 and 4 to a bed, the way poor children did, pressed close for warmth against the long Alabama nights. And then, when Joe was about 2 years old, his father was taken from them. Monroe Barrow was committed to a state institution while his son was still a baby, and from then on, it was Lily who would raise the family, alone. A laundress, a woman who worked with her hands, she kept her children fed in a place that offered them almost nothing. No good schools, no good work, and over all of it, the long shadow of the Klan. In 1926, Lily did what hundreds of thousands of black families were doing in those years. She gathered her children and went north. They were part of what we now call the Great Migration, that vast current of people leaving the Cotton South for the cities of the North, looking for a life the South would not give them. The Barrows landed in Detroit, Michigan, but the North was no promised land. It was crowded and hard, and the boy from Alabama did not take to it easily. He was shy. He had a stammer, a speech that caught and stumbled in his mouth, and at school he fell behind. They placed him in a vocational school and set him to a trade, cabinet making, the working of wood with his hands. By 12, he was hauling blocks of ice up the stairs of buildings where wealthier white families lived, into homes a boy like him could never have lived in himself. Later, he would push truck bodies down the line at the Ford plant. Hard work, and a great deal of it, for a boy. His mother had a dream for him, though. She scraped together what little she had and paid for violin lessons, because she wanted her son to make something gentle with those hands. But the boy had found something else. The story goes that the money meant for the violin found its way, instead, to a boxing gym. What is certain is this: somewhere in those Detroit years, a friend laced a pair of gloves onto Joe Barrow, and the hands that were meant to play music closed into fists. The hands his mother meant for something gentle would have to carve a way out of the poverty he was born into. He kept it from her as long as he could. He even fought under a shortened name, dropping the Barrow, going simply as Joe Louis, so the headlines would not give him away. She found out, of course. Sons cannot hide that kind of thing forever. But she never stopped giving him the one thing she had to give: the thing she told him again and again: do right, and remember that a good name is better than money. He would keep the good name. The money would be another story. By the summer of 1934, the secret was a secret no longer. Joe Louis turned professional, and on a July night in Chicago, he knocked out a man named Jack Kraken in the first round. He was 20 years old, and he was about to rise faster than almost anyone the sport had seen. But he did not rise alone. He was taken in hand by two black men from the world of Detroit and Chicago gambling, John Roxborough and Julian Black, and a brilliant trainer named Jack Blackburn. What Roxborough offered Joe was something almost unheard of for a black fighter in those days. He had watched white managers use up young black boxers and throw them away, burned out and broke before their prime. He promised Joe the opposite: real training, a decent life, a fair share. Years later, Joe would put it plainly. Roxborough, he said, had been talking about black power long before the phrase existed. But there was a shadow over everything, and its name was Jack Johnson. 20 years before, Johnson had become the first black man to hold the heavyweight title, and he had refused to shrink himself for anyone. He drove fast cars, married white women, and stood over the white men he beat and smiled. White America never forgave him for it. After Johnson lost the crown, the door to the title slammed shut, and for 2 decades, no black fighter was allowed near it. Roxborough and Black were determined that Joe would not be a second Jack Johnson. So they built a set of rules around him, commandments, some called them. Never be photographed with a white woman. Never gloat over a man you had beaten. Never take a fixed fight. Live clean, fight clean, and let your fists do the talking. Now, my friend, you can hear those rules 2 ways, and both are true. You can hear a man being told to make himself small and safe for white America. And some, in time, would accuse Joe of exactly that, of being too humble, too quiet. Or you can hear 3 black men in a brutal age doing the only thing that might pry the door back open. And it worked. Joe Louis won, and won, and won his first 27 fights, most of them by knockout. The purses growing into sums no black fighter had ever been paid. With every victory, something larger was happening. In the homes of black America, his name began to mean something. When Joe's fists landed, a whole people felt it, felt, for a few minutes at a time, like the world might bend their way. Then came the 19th of June, 1936. A German fighter named Max Schmeling, a heavy underdog, met the unbeaten young fighter, and in the 12th round, he put Joe Louis on the canvas and kept him there. It was one of the great upsets the sport had ever seen. And far away in Germany, the Nazi government seized on it, holding Joe's beaten body up as proof of what they had been preaching all along, that one kind of man is simply born above another. You can imagine the quiet that must have fallen in those homes that night. The radio's still on, but the cheering gone. For the first time, the man who could not be beaten had been beaten. He had been knocked down, and the only question that mattered now was whether he could get up. He said it himself. In the days that followed, he would never truly be champion until he beat Schmeling. He got up. Of course he got up. A year after the loss to Schmeling, on the 22nd of June, 1937, Joe Louis stepped into the ring against the reigning champion, James Braddock, and took the heavyweight title of the world. He was 23 years old, and he was the champion. And yet it did not feel finished. There was still that one man out there, that one night on the canvas that had never been answered. As Joe said, he could not call himself a true champion until he had beaten Max Schmeling. So the rematch was made. But by the time it came, it was no longer a fight between 2 men. The world had darkened. Germany was on the march, and its government had built a whole mythology around Schmeling's earlier victory. Proof, they claimed, of the master race. And so a boxing match became something else, a stand-in for a war that had not yet started. Freedom against fascism. The United States against Nazi Germany. The pressure was enormous. Even the President of the United States summoned Joe to the White House before the fight to remind him what was riding on it. Now, I want to be honest with you about something, because it matters. Max Schmeling was not a Nazi. He refused to join the party. He never believed the lies about one race standing above another. And not long after this fight, when the Nazis turned their violence on the Jews, he would quietly hide 2 Jewish boys to save their lives. The story the world told that night, good against evil, was laid over the top of 2 boxers, only one of whom had chosen any of it. Remember that. We will come back to it at the end. On the 22nd of June, 1938, a year to the day since he had won the crown, some 70,000 people filled Yankee Stadium. And out beyond the stadium, a nation pressed close to its radios in the dark, the way it always did when Joe fought. But this time, the weight on him was unlike anything before. He felt it. Here he was, a black man, carrying the hopes of a whole country on his back. I had the burden of representing all America, he would say. And here is the part you must not look away from. White Americans who, in that very season, were still lynching black men in the South, were counting on this black man to knock Germany down. He carried them anyway. In the stadium, 70,000 people went quiet. Across the country, in living rooms and around radios, people leaned in and held their breath. And then the bell rang. It was over in about 2 minutes. Joe Louis came across the ring and did not stop. A storm of punches, Schmeling down, up, and down again. 4 times that great German fighter went to the canvas, and the 4th time he did not rise. 1 round, just over 2 minutes. The man they had called living proof of a master race lay flat on the floor of an American ring, knocked out by a black man whose grandparents had been born into slavery. And the country came apart with joy. Not only Black America, though Black America wept and sang and poured into the streets, but White America too. All of it together for one night on the same side. A black man, born in a sharecropper's cabin to a family that owned nothing, was, for that one night, the most cheered man in America, celebrated by black and white alike, a thing almost nothing else could make happen. For one night, my friend, it seemed as though everything might be all right. He had given the country its proudest night. Soon he would start giving it everything else. And give it he did. When the Japanese struck Pearl Harbor and the United States went to war, Joe Louis did not have to lift a finger. He was the heavyweight champion of the world. He could have sat the whole thing out in comfort. Instead, he opened his hands. He fought a man named Buddy Bear and gave the entire purse to the Navy Relief Fund. He fought Abe Simon and gave that purse to Army Relief. He bought tickets to his own fights so that soldiers could come and watch for free. Years before, his family had once taken a little public assistance to survive. When he had money, he quietly paid every cent of it back. Think of that. The boy who had once slept 4 to a bed, who had hauled ice into homes he could not enter, now had a fortune in his hands, and he gave it away to a country at war. This was simply who he was. What came in through those fists went right back out through open hands. Then he did the thing that surprised even those who knew him. He enlisted. The most famous athlete in America put on the uniform of a private and served on a private's pay. And he served, my friend, in an army that was still segregated, an army that kept black soldiers in separate units and second-class conditions, even as it asked them to die for the country that treated them so. Joe staged exhibition bouts to lift the spirits of the troops, and behind the scenes, by several accounts, he used what power he had to help black soldiers who had run into trouble. Among them, it is said, a young man named Jackie Robinson. Asked why he believed America would win the war, Joe gave an answer that traveled the whole country. "We will win," he said, "because we are on God's side." It was a good and generous chapter, and underneath it, unseen by anyone, a trap was quietly closing. Here is what no one was paying attention to. Those purses he had given away, the checks had been written in his name first, before the money ever reached the Navy or the Army. And in the eyes of the taxman, money that passes through your hands is your income, even if you never kept a penny of it. With wartime tax rates climbing toward 90 cents on the dollar, the government would one day look at all that money Joe had given to the war effort and decide that he owed tax on every bit of it. He did not know it yet. No one told him. He trusted the people around him to handle the money side. He always had. And that trust would one day cost him more than any opponent ever did. The hands that had given everything away were about to be handed a bill. The fighting was over. The reckoning was not. The bill, when it came, was for a fortune. The government had looked at the purses Joe gave to the Navy and the Army, money he never kept, and counted it as his income. They had looked at the tickets he bought for soldiers and refused to let him deduct even those. And the tax rates of those years were merciless on a great deal of his money. The government took 90 cents of every dollar. The debt, which had really begun building back in 1937, kept growing. And here was the cruelest part of all. It grew by itself. Interest piled on top of interest, year after year, whether Joe earned a penny or not. In 1949, Joe Louis retired. He walked away as the heavyweight champion of the world, never beaten for the title, the longest reigning champion the division had ever known. He should have walked into a comfortable life. Instead, he walked away owing something close to $500,000, and the interest was still climbing. Joe Louis had built his whole life on a simple truth. If a man hit you, you hit him back harder, and eventually he fell. But you cannot hit a tax bill. You cannot knock out a number. This was an opponent that never tired, never bled, and never, ever went down. So the man who had earned the right to rest could not rest. He had to fight again, not for a title, not for glory, but for the tax collector. In 1950, at 36 years old, he came out of retirement and lost a long, hard fight to the new champion, Ezzard Charles. The crowd that night could see it. The reflexes were a half-second slow. The legs were not quite there. This was not the brown bomber who had ended Schmeling in 2 minutes. This was an aging man, fighting because he owed money. And if he raged at the unfairness of it, he did not do it in public. He laced up the gloves and went back to work, because that was the only kind of man he knew how to be. And then came the night that is hard to talk about. In 1951, at 37 years old, Joe stepped into the ring against a young, hungry fighter named Rocky Marciano. Marciano was everything Joe had once been: strong, relentless, unstoppable. And in the 8th round, the younger man knocked the old champion down, and this time he did not get up. Joe Louis, the man who had stood for a whole people, the man a nation had once gathered at the radio to hear, was finished. It was over. He would never fight in earnest again, and it had bought him almost nothing. He gave the Marciano money to the government, and still the debt would not shrink, because the interest from all the years before swallowed it whole. Joe said it himself, as plainly as a man can say a thing: the more he worked, the less he had. It was the truest thing he ever said. The years that followed were a slow, grinding down. The debt climbed past $1 million. He wrestled professionally for money, He refereed. He shook hands and made appearances, anything to send a little more to the taxman. And in 1953, when his mother, the woman who had taught him that a good name is worth more than money, passed away and left him a few $100s in her will, the government reached in and took even that. A few $100s from a laundress to her son. They took it. Now, my friend, people have argued for years about who is to blame for all this. Some say the government hunted him without mercy, a black hero made an example of. Others point to the brutal tax laws of the time, which fell on everyone. Others still say the men who handled Joe's money, his managers and promoters, made promises they did not keep and left him holding a bill that was never only his. And Joe himself, in later years, was honest about his own part. He had trusted too many people, paid too little attention to the money, and signed papers he did not understand. The truth is probably all of these at once. But here is the part that does not depend on whose fault it was. A man who had given his country everything he had was being slowly stripped of everything he had left. He kept the good name, his mother had told him to, but the money, every fortune those great hands had ever earned, was gone. He had survived every opponent the world sent him. The next one came from inside. The opponent that came from inside was his own mind. In his later years, Joe Louis began to use cocaine, and his thoughts began to turn dark and strange. He grew certain that people were plotting against his life, that there were enemies in the walls, poison in the air. In 1969, he collapsed on a street in New York, and not long after, he was committed to a hospital for the workings of his own mind. The most fearless man America had ever cheered was now afraid of shadows that were not there. I want you to hear that not as a scandal, my friend, but as a wound. This was a man who had carried an entire nation on his back for decades, a man the country had used up and then handed a bill it knew he could not pay. Something in him had finally bent under all of it. You can break a man's body in a ring and he will get up. Break his sense that the world is fair year after year, and something else gives way. That is not a man to laugh at. That is a man to grieve for. And then, slowly, came the hands that held him up. The first of them belonged to his wife. In 1959, Joe had married a woman named Martha Jefferson, a pioneering attorney, a black woman practicing law at a time when that was almost unheard of, and, by every account, the real fighter in that household. She did not leave. Through the delusions, through the hospitals, she stayed. And with her at his side, Joe was able to put down the cocaine for good. Together, over the years, they took in and raised a house full of children. She brought into their home, and she made a life for him out of the wreckage. The strange fears never entirely left him, but he was not facing them alone anymore. His body, by then, was failing too. In 1977, heart surgery left him in a wheelchair, and he would spend his last years sitting down. Now, here is where the easy story would have you weep. The fallen champion, broke and broken, propped up in a casino like a sad relic. But the easy story is not the true one, and I promised you the truth. By this time, the government had finally forgiven what was left of the debt, and the people at Caesar's palace did not put Joe Louis at that door to mock him. They gave him a fine home and a good salary. One of the men who hosted him there, Gene Kilroy, would grow angry for the rest of his days whenever anyone said Caesars had taken advantage of Joe. Joe Louis, he would say, lived like a king over there. His own son said his father was happy there, happy to be seen, to shake hands, to sign his name for people who, whatever I told you at the start, did know exactly who he was. When his medical bills came, his old friend Frank Sinatra quietly paid them. And across an ocean, the German he had once knocked flat, Max Schmeling, had been sending him money for years, in secret, asking only that no one tell Joe it came from him. The empty hands, you see, were never really left empty. A wife's hand, a friend's hand, the hand of a man he had once beaten in a ring, reaching across the world. They were held. He had been knocked down by everything but death. Death came gently and on his own terms. His last night was spent the way so many of his nights had been spent, at the fights. On the 11th of April, 1981, Joe Louis sat at ringside at Caesar's Palace and watched two young heavyweights, Larry Holmes and Trevor Berbick, fight for the title that had once been his. Picture him there in his wheelchair, an old man now, his great hands folded in his lap, watching young men do the thing he had done better than almost anyone who ever lived. We can only imagine what passed through his mind watching those two in the ring, whether he remembered his own nights under those same kind of lights, the whole world holding its breath on the sound of his name. He did not say. He just watched. The crowd knew he was there. They always knew when Joe was there. Even now, even diminished, even in a wheelchair, when the brown bomber was in the building, men still turned to look. Hours later, in the early hours of the next morning, the 12th of April, 1981, in Las Vegas, his heart simply stopped. He was 66 years old. There was no ring this time, no crowd, no bell. There was only the quiet of a man's last morning, and then there was nothing at all. That was all. After a life so loud, the roar of 70,000 in a stadium, a whole nation shouting at its radios, the bells, the crowds, the cheering that had once shaken the country, it ended in the quiet of an ordinary morning. The hands that had carried a people, the hands that had given everything away, the hands that strangers had shaken at a casino door, those hands were still now. The man who had never stayed down was down for good, and this time it was a mercy. The fight was over. The long, hard fight that no man could win. It was over, and Joe Louis was finally, gently, at rest. For so long, the country had let him slip from its memory. It had cheered him, used him, and then, in the slow, grinding years, mostly looked away. But death has a way of waking people up. In the days that followed, America remembered Joe Louis all at once, remembered everything he had been, and everything he had given, and everything it owed him. Headlines that had not spoken his name in years spoke it now. The forgetting, it turned out, had only been a kind of sleep. And at the funeral, my friend, there would be one more thing. An old enemy was coming to help carry him home. They said goodbye to him twice. The first farewell was in Las Vegas at Caesar's Palace, where thousands came to file past him. They had laid his body in a boxing ring, which was exactly right. That was where he had always belonged. The Reverend Jesse Jackson spoke and reminded the room that the real Joe Louis had always been far more than the simple, smiling picture the world had made of him. Our Joe, he called him. The second farewell was at Arlington National Cemetery. By the strict rules, Joe Louis had not earned a place among the nation's military dead. But the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, set the rules aside. And on the 21st of April, 1981, Joe Louis was buried with full military honors on that sacred hillside. The country that had used him up and looked away now claimed him, at the last, as one of its heroes. And do you remember what I asked you to hold on to, back at that fight in 1938? Among the men who carried Joe Louis to his grave was Max Schmeling. The German once called the face of the master race, the man Joe had knocked flat in 2 minutes, had crossed an ocean to help lay his friend to rest. It is widely said that Schmeling helped pay for the funeral, too. Two old fighters made enemies by a world that needed them to be, and in the end, only friends. The honors came after. A Congressional Gold Medal in 1982, and in 1989, The city of Detroit raised a monument to him, a great bronze fist suspended in the air. Of all the things they could have built, they built his hand. Because in the end, my friend, this was always a story about a pair of hands. The fists that carried the hopes of a whole people. The open hands that gave a fortune away to a country at war. The empty hands of the long, hard years that followed. And then, at the very end, the hands of everyone who loved him. A wife, a friend, an old opponent, reaching out to hold him up and to carry him home. Once, someone asked Joe's wife if it was true that her husband had died with nothing. She did not flinch. "He's not broke," she said. "He's rich, rich with friends." She was right. The country he had lifted on his shoulders let him fall, but the people he had given himself to never did. So the next time you see an old photograph of a fighter with his fists raised, or hear the crackle of a radio call from a fight long ago, remember him. Remember the boy from the Alabama cotton field who gathered a nation around its radios in the dark and made it, for a few short minutes, believe the world might be fair? A sports writer named Jimmy Cannon said it best, and I can think of no better way to leave him. Joe Louis was a credit to his race, the human race.